Hello and welcome to episode 260 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and today we're gonna get a little spooky, but not too spooky. Just, address a very small slice of the pumpkin pie of spookiness. But joining me today is first, Hilary Andreff.
Hi there.
And second, Audra Bowling.
Hello.
Alright. Hilary, Audra, Halloween is soon. This episode is going up a couple days before Halloween, and we have a special feature planned for RPG fan in general, not just Retro Encounter. On Halloween, we are posting a feature about vampires. All three of us wrote for parts of it. About 6 or 7 RPG fan staff all wrote it all together. But a couple months ago, we were casting around ideas of what to write for Halloween and landed on vampires because... first of all, vampires are a very Halloween thing, and second, vampires are just cool.
They are.
Can confirm.
So, listeners, if you're listening to this podcast right when it comes out, the feature probably isn't out yet. I think this is going up the 29th or something, and the actual date of Halloween is the 31st, of course. Please check around for October 31st, 2020. If you're listening in the future, to read that article. It was a lot of fun to write my portion of it, and I've seen it in draft form. It looks really good. So please check out the Halloween 2020 Vampires feature. For this podcast, we're going to overlap with a lot of what is discussed in the feature, just talk about some of our favorite RPG vampires, why they're cool, why they're scary, why they're sexy, because vampires have always been kind of weirdly sexy. Like they're sort of associated with romance, like the act of taking blood is sort of weirdly intimate. I think that for being movie monsters and murder monsters, they're also kind of romantic. Am I completely insane in thinking that?
No, they've had those sorts of associations from way early on.
Yeah.
And it's only gotten more pronounced over time, I would say.
You could say some recent vampire fiction really lays the romance on thick, but that's definitely not a subject that we're going to discuss. The most romantic recent vampires
and
of
sparkles,
fiction.
Yes.
Yeah,
and sparkles.
Yeah, we can pass on that one if you don't mind.
Nope.
I have not read any of those books or seen any of those movies, except I did see the second half of the last or second to last Twilight movie when some of my friends were having a drunk watch of it, playing a drinking game, and I joined partway through, and I had no earthly idea what was going on. But there was...
I did something similar with some Naginata martial arts dojo mates. We had drinks after an event and ended up at the theater seeing part of, I think, the second one.
I believe that the last book was divided into 2 movies, and I don't remember if it was Final Movie Part 1 or Final Movie Part 2, but it was one of the last 2, and so that's the only one I've seen at all. But it seemed pretty wild, and people were very drunk.
That's probably a good way to enjoy it.
Yeah, this is by far the most Twilight discussion that has ever happened on an RPG fan podcast, and it is ending now. Before we jump into a bunch of video game vampires, do we have a favorite vampire? It can be in video games or outside of video games, whether it's live-action film, animation, literature. What are some of our favorite vampires? Do we have a volunteer?
I'll go.
Go
It's
for
going to
it.
be based a lot off what I've seen recently. So
Sure.
recently, I started watching Angel, which is kind of...
Oh,
I missed it by a long stretch of time.
Yeah,
But in the vein of the heroic kind of do-gooder vampire, a little bit. I would mention him.
so yeah, the three of us are about the same age, so that show came out when we were all in high school. So
Yep.
yeah, a little less than 20 years ago. Okay. I got into Buffy and Angel a little bit late too, but it was the favorite show or shows of one of my close friends, and she lent me DVDs a couple of years after they came out. So I'm a big Angel and Spike fan. I'm not going to deny it.
Yep.
Audra, do you have a favorite vampire in fiction?
Actually, I was going to say Spike.
Oh no, let's get into it.
I quite like him I haven't seen all of Buffy and Angel, but the episodes I've seen of it, I actually quite liked him.
He's remarkable. He's one of those breakout characters like a Steve Urkel, that where he was supposed to die early or just be in a couple episodes early, but he ended up being so popular that he sort of took over the show, became a huge presence in the show. Because again, he was a season 2 villain. who was in like one episode of season 3, and then was a major character for the entire rest of Buffy and one season of Angel. And he's like the best character in Buffy in the around the season 5-6 range.
Thank you, James Marsters.
Yeah, hugely entertaining dude, and way better as Spike than when he was Piccolo in the Dragon Ball Z live action movie that no one should ever discuss. So yeah, let me think. Do I have a favorite vampire that's not in a video game? Because I mean, we'll get into some of my favorite video game vampires. I'm a big Alucard and Castlevania fan. We got
Yes.
There's a certain Disgaea vampire whom I adore.
Shoot! I want to mention Sassy Alucard from the Netflix series.
Sure, yeah, he is quite sassy. And they even gave him some video game power stuff in that. Like, he gets his sword familiar, and his animal transformations, and his awesome hair. They did do a really good job by Alucard in the Castlevania movie.
Yeah, I think so. I agree.
That's another one I need to watch.
It's good. If you have ready access to Netflix, then it's extremely entertaining. It's not even that long. I think the whole run of seasons is maybe 10 to 12 episodes, right?
They're short seasons, yeah.
Yeah, like I think the first season was only 4 episodes, but then it did really well, so they just made the other seasons are longer. Yeah, Netflix Castlevania. We even had a whole episode of Retro Encounter on it back in April, I think. I'd have to check a calendar. But let's see. Speaking of checking calendars, favorite vampire. Got to think of something. Blade. That's right. I'm landing on Blade. Those Wesley Snipes movies in the late '90s, early 2000s. His role in Marvel Comics. He's even in a couple of the Marvel video games. There have been some good Blade comics and anime and appearances in animation over the years. Morbius is also a random comic book vampire that's done a good run of things. There's a really good vampire storyline in an old comic series by Brian K. Vaughan I used to read called The Runaways, which I think had a Hulu adaptation. Lots of vampires in comics, but Blade is maybe the most fun. So, okay, we got Blade, Spike, and Angel, a bunch of non-vampire words that are also names of vampires. But none of those three fellas appear in the feature that's coming on Halloween or in our main discussion today, our favorite vampires in RPGs, video games in particular. Audra, let's pick an item off our big list to discuss.
How about the Suikoden?
Right, and there's one huge presence in Suikoden Vampire, and that is Neclord, which I thought was supposed to be a bad translation of Necrolord, but no, his name in Japanese is also Neclord, the Lord of Nex. He is almost like an exaggeration of the Western idea of a vampire, but he is kind of scary and really cool and has really dope battle music.
Yeah, somehow it works with him. I really love pretty much the whole resolution of his story arc in Suikoden 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in Suikoden 2, they add a second vampire character, and she sort of joins around when you're trying to take down Neclord for the second and final time.
Yes, Sierra. She's awesome. I quite liked her.
And Suikoden's so unusual. Like they really build the mythology of that world a lot, and there are characters that have known each other for decades and characters meeting for the first time. Sierra has sort of been around for hundreds of years, and she knows some of the other people on the team, but she almost forces her way into your party, right?
Right, and basically in order to take down Neclord, because there's a whole backstory there that was really interesting that they went into in both Suikoden 2 and the Suiko Gaiden. I'm trying to think of what
Suiko Gaiden, yep. Are there other vampires in Suikoden? Because I've only really played 2 and a little bit of 1 and 3, trying to get into it and mostly failing. But I really liked Suikoden 2. Is there other vampire fiction, vampire mythos in that world? Because it's such a broad world and there's such a variety of characters. I wouldn't be shocked if there was a late coming vampire in another one.
No, not that I remember.
Huh. All right. That would be.
They kind of went to different mythology stuff after that. Like mermaids and...
But even if you had made up an answer and said that there was a Suikoden Tactics coven of vampires, I would have believed you, because Suikoden just is so broad and goes crazy places.
Mm-hmm.
And Sierra, doesn't she have a special rune attached to her that gives her extra powers? Because there a lot of the Suikoden power arrangement comes in rune form.
She's the bearer of the moon rune, which is a true rune.
Right, and there's a different moon rune that's not the true moon rune, and you rhyme moon and rune a lot trying to figure it out loud. Because Necklord had the moon rune also, right?
Yeah,
that's what it was.
He stole it from her, I think, was...
Okay, yeah, and she's trying to get it back, mostly get it out of his hands, because the true runes are really powerful and dangerous. And every Suikoden game is basically centered around securing or preventing an apocalypse from one of the true runes. But yeah, Suikoden 2. I think, you know what, I'm going to say it. We did Suikoden 2 in 2018 and Suikoden 5 earlier this year for the podcast. I can almost guarantee we're going to do another Suikoden game in 2021. We've been talking about it a lot behind the scenes. And especially with... what was that? Eiyuden? Yeah, Eiyuden Chronicles being such a success in 2020. There's a lot of Suikoden hype, so I'm pretty sure we're going to do another Suikoden episode in 2021, but I can't say which one it is or when it's going to happen, but there is interest among staff, so that'll be fun.
Okay.
Hilary, you have any opinion on Suikoden vampires, or is it time to move on?
Awesome. I like the association with the moon. I'm actually not super well versed on them, so it's good to learn about them. I was going to ask anything else I should know about them as characters, like any other reason they're particularly cool?
It all really comes back to Nick Lord's awesome battle music. It is great. I used it for... He has
some great lines, too.
Yeah, no, he has a lot of very dramatic Bela Lugosi-ass stuff, but
Gotcha.
But I would play Nick Lord's battle music for this episode, but we used it definitely for one of the Suikoden episodes in fall 2018, so I'm gonna hold back. But yeah,
nice.
Suikoden 2, excellent game, and Nick Lord and Sierra are two bright points of the many in that game.
Hey, also, Bela Lugosi, October birthday, so near Halloween.
Oh,
and
happy birthday,
my birthday
Bella.
buddy, too. October 20th.
Happy birthday, Bella. Bela Lugosi, he was in one of the theatrical adaptations of Dracula in the 1920s, and when he was a Hungarian immigrant, he didn't speak a word of English, but was desperate to make it on the stage, so he learned all of his lines as Dracula phonetically. So the weird cadence and weird accent that we associate with Dracula, and the slick-backed hair, sort of fangs out the mouth look, that's all Bela Lugosi, and mostly because he couldn't speak English at all.
Which is interesting, because that's made its way into a lot of the vampire conventions in fiction, right, and pop culture, some of which we might even talk about today.
Yeah, and the Transylvania region, which we associate with Vlad the Impaler and Dracula in general, is, I think, modern-day Romania, which is not that far from Hungary, so it's, there's a Slavic connection there, sort of, even though the Hungarian language isn't Slavic. It's Central Asian. That's a whole mess. But that part of Europe and Bela Lugosi's portrayal of Dracula is a lot of the Western vampire image that we have today, which is pretty cool. Because Bela Lugosi sounds a little bit like Sollosi, so I've always enjoyed that extremely tenuous connection I have to Bela as the great grandson of Hungarian immigrants.
We're fans here.
Anyway, but speaking of Dracula, let's talk about Dracula for real next, because I think, personally, when I think of video game vampires, Castlevania is maybe the first thing that comes to mind. Castlevania from a Konami series from the late 80s, basically a straight-up 2D action game. And then it took a big swing towards RPG with Symphony of the Night in 97 in Japan, 98 worldwide. In every Castlevania game, or at least most of them, a mysterious castle appears out of nowhere, called Castlevania, and that castle is alleged to appear every 100 years with its master, Dracula, trying to drag the world into hell or take over the world or do something pretty bad. And
Shroud something in Eternal Night.
Oh yeah, it's always something like that, but his goals are always vague, and to a point, Dracula almost becomes as hunted as the humanity that Dracula is trying to kill. It's explored pretty well in that Netflix series we mentioned earlier. They have a very cool angle, I think, on Dracula and his legacy. But in general, the story idea was Castlevania rises every 100 years, and they break that rule all the time by having direct sequels and visiting the castle only a few decades later. Most of the early Castlevania games, each one is in a different decade, with Symphony of the Night maybe being the most vampire-y one, because it's Dracula's half-vampire son, Alucard, taking him down in Castlevania in that particular game. And the Castlevania Netflix series is based a lot on Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, which stars Trevor Belmont, and also its sequel, Castlevania Curse of Darkness for the PS2, which adds characters. But yeah, for whatever reason, the Castlevania Netflix series mostly draws from a NES game, a PS1 game, and a PS2 game that are mostly connected, but it's still an interesting story choice. But yeah, Castlevania, it's almost always Dracula being taken down, and this is a really cool, ornate, gothic version of Dracula. He has amazing hair and clothes. He has a contract with the Grim Reaper and a bunch of other demons. There's a really creative boss and action design that can vary pretty wildly game to game sometimes. And it's a shame that Konami is really not making any games anymore, because the only Castlevania we've gotten in the past couple of years are modern system versions of older Castlevania games, which is not the worst, but still a little sad that we're probably not going to get new Castlevania maybe ever again.
Yeah, when you put it that way.
Konami.
So do any of us have a favorite Castlevania game or a favorite version of Dracula in them? Because, I mean, there's a lot of vampires in these, but Dracula's the standout, of course.
I have not ever played a Castlevania game, so I
can't
answer
Audra,
that.
You're killing me. You're killing me. And I'm rising from the dead again because of this episode, and then you're killing me again.
Sorry.
Aww. That's okay. We're undead. We can handle it. Dracula's such a really cool through line. I always think of Alucard, and when I think of Castlevania Dracula, wow, my mind immediately goes to this Belmont Smash reveal.
Oh, right, yeah.
Where the particular thing that they chose from Castlevania to add to the stage was that Grim Reaper.
Right, and there's a Dracula boss fight in Simon and Trevor's story modes in that game. So well, Smash is very, very keen on references and nostalgia, so they put a lot of Castlevania classic stuff in Trevor and Richter's. I'm sorry, no, it's Simon and Richter, right? Yes. I think I said Trevor before. It's Simon and Richter in Smash. Richter is the main character of Castlevania Rondo of Blood and an NPC in Castlevania Symphony of the Night. But Simon and Richter in Smash with Dracula as a boss fight in story mode. A lot of cool stuff there. The Dracula Castle stage is also pretty cool.
Yeah, it just shows off everything that's Dracula Castlevania. The ornate castle, kind of like chapel area, the Grim Reaper, awesome boss fight, all of that. And I'll always have an appreciation for Alucard just because his story is very much, I don't want to call it dramatic, but half vampire.
I mean, it's sort of very edgy and melodramatic in a 1997 way that's just awesome. And, and if I were to identify a personal favorite Castlevania game, it's hard not to pick Symphony of the Night.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, just because the action in the castle and the characters are so awesome. But we got a really good of sort of Symphony of the Night likes in the 2000s and maybe early 2010s. And the one that sort of sticks with you the most are the duo of Aria of Sorrow and Dawn of Sorrow, which shockingly, like it's not clear that Dracula's in the game, because when his castle appears, there's a bunch of people wandering around like, well, Dracula's not here, but there's something at the top of this castle. And it it introduces like Dracula almost as like a concept where there's a bunch of people trying to inherit his powers, and the main character, Soma, can defeat monsters and use their powers and collecting them in a big list like Pokemon or Final Fantasy Blue Magic or something. It's for gameplay and story concept reasons. I really like those two games. Aria is for GBA and Dawn is for DS. Dracula, a great video game vampire. Castlevania, maybe the premier vampire-y series of video games, even though there are literally multiple games called Vampire on our list.
Yes, and many Belmonts that have tried and defeated him.
Julius Belmont is the Belmont in those Sorrow games, and he's a good Belmont too. I like me some J. Bell. But Hilary, what's another video game vampire we want to tackle here?
All right, I've got to choose my favorite first. I really like the siblings in the Shadowheart series a lot. So that is Keith, Joachim, and Hilda or Hildegard. Their last name is Valentine, and they're one of them is in each game, but they also do kind of like crossover and make little cameos in each other's games, which is adorable.
I think I was on the record when we did some Shadow Hearts Covenant episodes a couple years ago, but I adore Joaquin. He is one of my favorite like PS2 RPG characters, full stop. But let's talk about him for a minute. He is a masked wrestler / masked vigilante fighter / like transforming superhero who can become, who turns into, different versions of wrestlers and bats of different, based on his biorhythms and the phases of the sun or moon. And his weapons are found objects. Where you'll be strutting around and you'll see a mailbox and Joaquin will be like, that mailbox, I must have it. And Yuri's like, Joaquin, don't rip out that mailbox. That's somebody's mail. They need that mailbox. And Joaquin's like, no, I must. And then
but there's so much love in this mailbox.
Yeah,
it's carrying the well wishes of this dear family.
Yeah, and the mailbox is his next good weapon for the next 5 hours or something. And his weapons eventually are a skyscraper, a submarine, I think maybe a coffin at one point. But they're basically just large blunt objects that he carries over his back like a lumberjack hauling around a tree. And
my favorite is the frozen tuna.
Yes.
In Russia.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think his strongest weapon is literally the SS Nautilus submarine from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
I think you're right.
Yeah, so it's Joaquin
carries around a submarine.
Yeah, he carries around a submarine. It's about the size of like, like a coffin or like a telephone pole cut in half. It's not like taking up the entire room, but it's
all right. I have to say it. It's only a model.
Yeah, it's only that's it. Okay, it's only a model for the submarine. It's been a while since I played that thing, and part of it was definitely late at night trying to beat it in time for the podcast.
I just really wanted to quote the Monty Python line.
Oh, wow, that went right over my head. My bad.
No worries.
But Hilda also has sort of a weird body changing, transforming angle to her gameplay.
Yeah, she does, and honestly, I am a little bit undecided on how I feel about it because gameplay wise,
I get it.
It's really, really, really fun gameplay wise. But she has a slim form and a curvy form, and she just alternates based on whatever personal similar rhythms to her brother. And she's really, really powerful, but that, I don't know, just something about the vacillating between, as a health professional, I think I just don't like that.
Yeah, no, that evokes some, low mental health, low self-esteem, eating disorder kind of visuals. And it's clearly done as a joke, which does not make it better, but it's like I wish the joke was in slightly better taste, maybe. But and Keith is in for the Valentine sibling from the first game. His powers aren't quite nearly as wacky as his two siblings. He's just a cool vampire boy.
He is a cool vampire boy. He has the blue castle. He's the first one of the family that you meet in the first game. He kind of, like when I first met him, had an Alucard kind of vibe a little bit. He was a vampire, but he was just kind of tired of the vampire life a little bit, and he was protecting the area where he was from. And not to spoil too much about Shadow Hearts, but something happens to Yuri. He ends up kind of unrecognizable at the top of Keith's tower. Keith runs into the rest of the party and goes, I don't know how he got here, but sure, I'll help you out. And he joins the party, and I'm trying to think of how to describe him, because he does have some sort of like vampire-y abilities, and I think he can transform into a silver bat.
Right, and Joaquin can transform into a golden bat.
And Hilda's the peach or pink bat.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're about 60% of the way to a bat Sentai. I'm into it.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder if they have any more siblings. Anyway,
they would have to be red or blue, because those are the two colors in every single Super Sentai. But I digress. All three Valentine siblings are really cool. Again, like Joaquin's my favorite character in my favorite of those three games. So
he's so earnest.
Yeah, he's so earnest, and he doesn't realize that his wrestling mentor is maybe trying to sexually assault him, but he thinks it's all training, so he just sort of takes it in stride. But like it's Shadow Hearts is so weird and wacky, and the fact that they have a trio of vampire siblings, one of whom is like a lollygoth girl, and one of whom is a masked luchador.
Keith's the traditional one.
Keith is the most normal one, and he's still cool. So, and Shadow Hearts is a little bit deliberately dark and gothic and weird. So, like, just having a vampire around kind of makes sense in all of those.
Yeah, and I think I think I pointed this out. I actually did the blurb for them. I think I pointed this out, but it's especially interesting that the series has that sort of like gothy, dark feel, but one of the more comedic and like lighter points of the whole thing is the vampire family.
Mm-hmm. You could even say they're blood related.
Yes.
Okay, I'm getting fired for that. But anyway, so let's move on so I can maybe quickly edit that out. Speaking of comedic vampires, I got to talk about my favorite video game vampire, and that's Valvatores from Disgaea 4. Disgaea has had vampires almost since the beginning. There's a vampire monster class that you can recruit and even level up in Disgaea 1. There's a vampire sort of mid-boss named Medeiros. There's another character literally named mid-boss, but that's a different fella. And Medeiros is blackmailing one of your characters, and there's some betrayal and some figuring things out, and then you defeat him, and then you sort of force him to join your party. But the real Disgaea vampire is Valvatores from Disgaea 4. Valvatores was a really dangerous, really powerful, cool vampire that you might think of like the monstrous kind of vampire from Western or Eastern myth. But then he meets a young woman that is not afraid of him, and he is so taken by her that he promises that he is not going to drink anyone's blood ever again until he gives her a real scare. But unfortunately, the young woman is sickly and dies before he can scare her.
Aww.
So, and the subtitle of Disgaea 4 is A Promise Unforgotten. So over 400 years, Valvatores loses all of his powers and goes down all the way to level 1, and works as a Prinny instructor in Hell. And Prinnies are basically sinners that have been stuffed after death, are stuffed into plush penguin costumes and used as slaves. So he's basically a supervisor for the lowest of the low in the underworld where he lives. And his best friend Fenric is a werewolf who's desperate to make Val the cool Valvatores he used to be. But Val's like, no, it's all good, Fenric. I'm just going to be a Prinny instructor. And instead of drinking blood for centuries, Valvatores has been eating sardines. And all the time talks about the nutritional benefits and greatness of sardines. And it
sounds like he's been hanging out with the Prinnies for too long.
He has. He's gotten real weird. And this is also a young Troy Baker voice role. So, like, if you want one of the top leading men in voice acting to dramatically say sardines, then Disgaea 4 is basically your only option. But and Valvatores is unusually principled, and like again, he was a terrifying demon lord vampire 400 years earlier, but now he's trying to do a good job taking care of Prinnies. And when a few of his Prinnies start acting unruly, he steps outside his box a little bit and notices that there's a bunch that the local government is really screwing things up. So he basically gathers a small army to take over his local underworld and set things right again. And and Disgaea 4 is kind of it has a sort of an anti-corruption thrust to its main story. And one thing it doesn't that I think is hilarious. I think chapter 6 is called The Final Episode. But it's not the final episode. Like the last 4 episodes are all called the final episode, and they resolve some character's story only for another surprise world-ending threat to arrive the next time. So again, Disgaea, it's a satirical parodical game. It goes for comedy a lot, and they have one of the funniest, goofiest anime vampires I have ever heard of in the central role, and it's excellent. Valvatores he was my avatar on PSN for a while. I like that dude so much. So yeah, you want a real goofy, funny anime vampire in a exploitable, weird strategy JRPG. Disgaea 4 is the center of that Venn diagram.
Awesome. That's a strong endorsement.
Yeah, and I know I popped off a little bit there, but I sort of figured I'm probably the only person here that's played Disgaea 4. I don't have John Tucker on the podcast with me this time.
Aww.
Are either of you Disgaea players?
I played 1 and some of 2.
All right. Oh, that counts.
I have not played either. any of them
bummer.
yet. Sorry.
No, that's all good. You don't need to apologize. Like there's too many games to have played them all. Again, this list I've played maybe half, maybe a little more than half. So I never feel bad about not playing something. But Disgaea has been around a while enough that you can get them a lot of places. Most of them are available on PC. 1, 4, and 5 have Switch ports. Disgaea 4 is a PS3 game that I believe had a Vita port and then a more recent Switch port.
I should get it then.
Yeah, when they were making Switch ports, like 5 came out first, and then they did complete end quote versions of 1 and 4, skipping over 2 and 3, which is a bummer because I really like Disgaea 2, but also, 1 and 4 are the best ones. That's what they were going for. And plus a couple years ago, Nipponichi was in financial dire straits, so maybe they decided to skip the line ahead to 4. But yeah, the Disgaea games, they handle movie monster stuff in a lot of strange ways. But when they do vampires, it started out with that goofy ass Medeiros in Disgaea 1, and the even goofier, even awesomer Valvatores in Disgaea 4. So Audra, I think we skipped over your turn. What's another RPG vampire we want to go over?
Well, actually, I love Marival from Wild Arms 2.
Okay, now now this is where I have to apologize because I played a lot of Wild Arms 1 and a lot of Wild Arms 3, but never 2. So let's talk about Marival a little bit.
Yeah, tell us, because I haven't played Wild Arms 2 either.
It's a pretty fun game, but I mean, there's some localization issues that I think.
Oh yeah, I mean
turn people off.
that's what, early PS1. So yeah, I'm sure it's a localized mess. I mean Suikoden 2 is a localized mess, and that's one of the all-time greats.
Well, Marival, she's been around for a while. I think she was friends with the Sword Magus, which is like a legendary saint character in that Filgaia. So she's been, I think, at least 1,000 years old or so, and she's outlived pretty much everyone that she knew. But she's actually I like her because she's more of like a dork. She's into technological gadgets, and she invents things and fights with giant robots.
All right,
okay. That's not exactly things I associate with vampires, but I'm intrigued.
No, but I love this concept already. Get old enough, and you just get dorky and play with gadgets. Yes.
Or you get old enough and you realize that, the coolest thing is actually giant robots. I should have been doing this for all 1,000 of my years instead of recently.
Yeah, it's pretty funny she kind of stands out just because she's a little bit of a dork. Like, she tries to act aloof and calm and cold and everything, but then it's like, I have a giant robot.
Wild Arms is
unusual. She even
unusual.
does kind of blue magic too, where she takes on abilities from enemies.
That's definitely interesting. That's a trend with RPG vampires for sure.
I think it's because, like, the act of biting something and drawing its blood is a way of sort of taking them into you that, you can logic your way into saying, now you have their powers.
Yeah, it's like one of the best ways for it to translate.
Yeah, and then also, vampires are monsters. They have monster powers. That's... where are we now? That was true of Soma Cruz in a few of those Castlevania games. It's true of Lester DeRosso in Bravely Default to a degree. It's also true of the legendary webcomic Axe Cop, where you turn into something if its blood gets on you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have not heard of Axe Cop, go to Google and check it out and thank me later. But back to Wild Arms 2. Wild Arms has always had an interesting relationship with technology, because it's basically a Wild West spaghetti western setting, but with ancient civilizations with super technology that you're uncovering. So there's giant robots in, I think, all of the Wild Arms games, or at least the ones that I know a little bit about. And so it's like it's cowboys and magic and samurai and giant robots. And again, it kind of all fits. And evidently, Wild Arms 2 has vampires, which was news to me until I read your part of the piece maybe a week or two ago.
I think she's supposed to be the last of them.
All right. Okay. So
it's
there
like
is
a major plot point
okay.
with her.
So there's not a ton of vampires in Wild Arms 1 that I've forgotten over the decades.
Oh no. No, she's like the last one, and it's sort of a sad story because she just isn't sure she wants to be friends with people at first because of that.
Well,
so she kind of just stands out a lot.
There is something lonely about the vampire life. I mean, that's part of the character of Keith Valentine and Alucard and others. Let's see, not Salvatore's, because if anything, he sort of like becomes surrounded by friends in spite of his vampirism. So, Hilary, what's another one from the list that we should talk about before we shut shop?
Let's go with one that's villainous. Let's go with the ones from Illusion of Gaia.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm not going to pass up an opportunity to talk about Illusion of Gaia.
I also enjoy Illusion of Gaia. I played a lot of Illusion of Gaia and Terra Enigma, but never Soul Blazer. And I mean, I remember the vampire siblings because they're the bosses of maybe my least favorite part of the whole game.
Oh boy, yeah.
The dungeon Mu, which is a sort of a famous lost city in some East Asian folklore, is a really challenging dungeon, slight difficulty spike for that point of the game, and you fight two vampires simultaneously as the boss, and they are not easy to deal with. I remember being stuck at that part of the game when I played it many, many moons ago.
Yeah, very, very common to get stuck there.
Yeah, not surprising. It's a bit of a gameplay wall, but let's talk about them.
I'm trying to remember because there is a cutscene. You do kind of like get a glimpse. They have in the seaside castle right before you go to Mu, if I'm not mistaken. You kind of get a glimpse of their standard villainous vampire life with a little bit of that, quintet judgment about humanity, how they've been treating people really badly, if I'm not mistaken. But then you go through this dungeon that's a difficulty spike and a bit of a slog and long. And then you get there and they have one of your crew attached to a bomb, which I'm not really sure how they got into modern explosives. It's one of those weird anachronisms.
Vampires have been around from a long time, so maybe they just have ancient bomb technology that hasn't survived to the modern day.
We're not exactly sure, but your friend is there and there's a timer and they have really strong coordinated attacks, so they're pretty impossible to get unless you can corner one of them and get one of them. And yeah, they're just tough.
But they are cool. I mean, again, that whole quintet trilogy is anachronistic and goes weird places, almost with disparate elements. Not terribly far away from the Wild Arms discussion we had a minute ago.
That's true.
But Illusion of Gaia is a really weird, thought-provoking game, and they just throw two vampires at you around the midpoint in a hard dungeon.
Oh, just no lead up, just kind of there they are.
Just, you get one... Again, I played this game a long time ago. You do get them in a cutscene sort of right when you're going into Mu, or maybe a little before then, and then they appear at the end of a dungeon with your friends attached to a bomb.
Oh wow!
It's and they're hard, but they are cool. What were their names again, Hilary?
Oh, geez, I need to look that up again.
Because it's a male and a female vampire.
Yes,
and
they have like the cool like contrasting looks.
Yeah, they have different looks, and I think they basically move around in the same manner, but they have sort of slightly different attack patterns.
They do, yeah. They have slightly different attack patterns, positioning, but they also have a really strong dual attack.
Yeah, so focusing down one and then killing the second one, which is I think maybe faster and more aggressive, but better to stop getting hit by that dual attack. Again, this is like maybe the hardest part of the game in my memory. Maybe like the very, very end is a bit tough too. But the Illusion of Gaia, really interesting game. It's got some vampires in it too. Now we're mostly sticking to the parts of the guide that we wrote, but there was parts of the feature that we wrote. But we got contributions from all over RPG fan staff. So let's jump into a couple games that maybe we aren't as familiar with. Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. You've heard of that, that low-key indie title. Hardly anyone's played it.
Right, so like popular it's on Alexa.
I've barely heard of it. You can probably play it on I don't know, on an iPad. But there is a whole vampirism system in Skyrim. You can find vampire monsters and become a vampire yourself. And if you even go around, mostly human towns as a vampire, you'll be treated like a monster, and everyone will attack you on sight. Vampirism is like you have to become sort of a stealth murderer if you become a vampire in Skyrim. I didn't do a lot of that vampire or werewolf stuff because I mostly just liked being a human and doing my quests and doing stuff around the different towns. But the first expansion to Skyrim, Dawnguard, introduces you to a society of vampires and an order of vampire hunting knights, and you can sort of pick sides and explore a whole new corner of the Skyrim world. And that was I think that was the first big expansion to Skyrim. I could be wrong about that because I only really played the base game for a little while. I'm not the biggest Skyrim guy, but I mean, it's pretty cool that one of the biggest RPGs of the whole 2010s has a whole vampire expansion.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. I don't know much about Skyrim, unfortunately.
Sometimes they make fun of our website and call it JRPG Fan because we do our tastes among staff do skew more to one side than the other. Although of course that's not a blanketly true statement. That's an oversimplification. But this list has more J than W in its RPG vampires. But another Western one that I have played a little bit is Vampyr, a game that only came out a year or two ago. I demoed it at E3 a couple years ago, and then it was free on PSN in the month of October. So if you're listening to this podcast now, you have right when it comes out. Maybe you have another week or so to download it for free. PS Plus subscribers.
Ooh, good plug. Nice timing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're listening to this on October 29th or 30th, you only have a couple days left. But it was part of the PS Plus games of the month for October 2020. And it's a pretty interesting take on sort of vampire open world concept. Again, I only played a demo of this, although it is sitting fresh and full on my PlayStation account now. But you can sort of go around as a local lord vampire, sort of righting wrongs and solving mysteries, or just killing people and draining them dry in your sort of local couple of towns. And the way it seemed to me was you can sort of like use a blood sense to determine how healthy someone is, and you can get a little bit of experience by fighting, but a ton of experience by drinking someone's blood. And there's a limited number of people around town, and you could maybe this friendly NPC is a really healthy person, so they'll give you a ton of EXP, but killing them will because they were a pillar of the community, we'll make a lot of enemies, or people will be searching for their killer. Or maybe like you won't be able to do quests with them in the future. Well, some ne'er-do-wells that could probably the town would probably improve with them dying are not very healthy and won't give you a lot of experience. And so when I was doing a demo at E3, one of the designers, I think they were French. This game was developed in Europe. Was describing it to me as like going around town and righting wrongs and solving stuff. And like improving someone's life might make them healthier enough to give you more experience when you finally kill them. So going around doing side quests is like fattening up pigs before eating them.
Oh boy, oh boy.
which is just such a deliciously dark angle for an open world game.
I mean, you could look at it that way. Like the more I read about this, the more interesting it is to me. I really should check this out because just the idea of a vampire having to consider how healthy their victims are is not something that comes up super often, but it's especially interesting because they set the game in London 1918 during a flu epidemic.
We did review this for the website when it came out in 2018, and Caitlin loved it. She gave it an 89 out of 100, and especially citing the atmosphere and characters and choice efficacy because a lot of the story paths and the open world elements in this game allow you to kill people that could affect the story later. So,
or delay things like you said, but lots of consequences and choice. It sounds like that's exactly the type. That's right up my alley. I need to try.
Yeah, I remember thinking the game looked a little bit buggy and messy when I saw promotional materials for it, but its final product was like sort of better than my expectations. And Caitlin was not the only positive review of it over the internet. It was like this is a cool game that does a lot of cool things. So it was a no-brainer. I'm a little bit cautious of downloading every single thing every month on PSN on PS Plus because I have limited space. And I know that I won't play most of the games that I download. But when this was a free one, I'm like, well, damn, I almost bought this a year ago. On the PS4 it goes.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that one. I didn't realize it was out.
Yeah, well, I mean, it came out a couple years ago, and I think it's all. I think
and
it's,
then on the PS.
Oh, sure, yeah. It was. I think it probably was a PC game first, but it is, it is free for PS Plus subscribers in October 2020. Let's see, where else do we want to go?
Would Morinth count as a vampire?
Oh, from Mass Effect?
Yeah, I was always wondering that.
Well, all right. Now, that's a very fair question. Morinth or Samara, technically, but Morinth is the one that actually uses her vampiric powers, while Samara swore off them and almost is like she became, because Samara also has those powers, but she remains celibate so as not to kill anyone, right?
I just thought she had like the gene potential for
That's
it.
what it was.
So
That's what you're right. You're right.
All her kids got it.
That's what it is, and she had multiple daughters, but Morinth is the one.
No, she's a carrier of vampirism.
Yeah, she basically yes. Samara is the there's a okay. We're dancing around a little bit. In Mass Effect 2, there is a condition that some women of that species have. Oh, what is a
Asari?
Yeah, Asari. I couldn't think of it. It's been so long since I played Mass Effect. But some Asari women, when they mate with someone, and they mate at a psychic level, so they can copulate with any species. Some of them will kill their partner at every single after every session. But it sort of unleashes their psychic abilities and gives them a euphoria that's sort of unmatched. So Morinth is one of these vampire-like Asari, and Samara is her mother. And Samara, who is a strong warrior, has been trying to track down her serial killer daughter for a long time. And part of the quest is, you meet Samara, you agreed to hunt down Morinth. But then when they're fighting each other, you can choose to kill off Samara or kill off Morinth.
Ooh.
And if you choose to kill off Samara, Morinth will take her mother's armor and masquerade as Samara, but you'll have a dark evil Asari with you instead of the do-gooder Asari, which is a pretty fun choice to make. And I forget what the name of that vampirism in Asari is called, but it's a cool idea at least.
Yeah, I guess it'd be more like a psychic vampire or something.
I couldn't remember the name Asari because I didn't want to say, Liara's species, because I think of, I really associate Asari with the Asari that's with you from most of the Mass Effect games.
Fair.
Kind of like, it's like, Krogans aren't Krogans, they're the Rex Grunts. It's like, that's also very unfair of me. Shoot, I was so into Mass Effect for 2 years when I played all of them twice each, but I haven't played Mass Effect in something like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. Maybe I should replay it down the line because I really enjoyed them.
Yeah, I did too. I need to. It's been only 2 years since I played it, but I want to play it again.
There was rumors of a PS4, Xbox Series S trilogy remake that I don't know if it's been confirmed or not, but people have been talking about it on gaming podcasts and websites for at least a full 8 months. So I think that's more of an inevitability than a rumor.
Yeah.
Are there any vampires in Dragon Age? I don't think so.
Not that I'm aware of.
A lot of blood, a lot of betrayal. Not really any vampires.
Yeah, I mean, blood mages can do stuff with blood, but that's about.
They sure can. But let's stick with blood for one final entry. I insist on talking about before we close, and that's Bloodstained.
That's the one I was going to pick too.
We talked about Castlevania a little bit earlier in the program, but one of the key Castlevania personnel from the late 90s into the early 2010s was Koji Igarashi. He was the assistant director who did a lot of design work on Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and then he was a director or producer for almost all of the Castlevania games in the 2000s. I think he wasn't on the Circle of the Moon team, but basically all of the others. And so he sort of became Mr. Castlevania for quite a while, and he even would attend conventions and make public appearances wearing a whip and a fedora because of his love of Belmont and Indiana Jones.
That's great.
He's also weirdly tall. Like when I met him at E3, he's like a 6 foot or 6'1" Japanese guy. Like that's a little uncommon. Like him towering over all of the other Konami people or Microsoft people. Because I met him at I saw him at a Microsoft arcade space. But yeah, so Koji Igarashi was ousted with a lot of other Konami creators in the 2010s and joined a bevy of them because both Hideo Kojima and the Suikoden creator had their own independent projects after leaving Konami, and Koji Igarashi's was called Bloodstained. Bloodstained, I mean, just looking at the early materials of it, it was obviously Castlevania in all but name. There was a stained glass sort of aesthetic where people became powerful magic users when their bodies start being corrupted by a mysterious crystal, and you can put the powers of monsters into the crystal to gain powers. Not terribly unlike the Sorrow Castlevania games. And there's a lot of gothic horror action and vampires in this, culminating in a battle that's basically the famous vampiress from literature Carmilla, like attacking you with all kinds of crazy blood crap. Like I think it's like waves and
blood everywhere
and spears of stuff made of blood, and it's just it's basically Dragon Age blood magic, but in action RPG form. That was a bit of a alarming cutscene to see for the first time. Also,
oh boy, I bet.
Mm-hmm. But
and it's interesting and worth noting that the protagonist in Bloodstained does have that almost vampire-like ability to take on powers from monsters, but at a cost.
Yeah, it's a little bit of like she becomes more of a monster the more powerful she gets, and it's explicitly more of an association with demons than of vampires, like in the text of the game. But like it's still very gothic visually. The church is involved as sort of an NPC. There's some good and some bad people associated with the church. Like the alchemy of those crystals is a major plot point. But maybe the most vampiric it gets is with a character named OD. And I don't know. Have you guys played Bloodstained?
I have not.
Vicariously, I have seen a lot of it.
Okay.
But I was not the one playing.
There's a character named Orlok Dracul.
Yes.
And go ahead and Google image search him right now and tell me that isn't Alucard from Castlevania. But you'll be lying, because Orlok Dracul is voiced by Robert Belgrade in English and Ryotaro Okio in Japanese, and both of those were the original voice actors for Dracula in for Alucard in Symphony of the Night. In all but name, they put Alucard in Bloodstained, gave him the original voice actors, made him a librarian, just like the librarian in Symphony of the Night. The powers are actually kind of hilarious. You can check out books from the library, and they give you stat bonuses. And as your library card improves by unlocking more of the map, you get more and more books. But if you take out a special collection book too far away from the castle, then Orlok Dracul hunts you down and is a special boss fight. So like he's basically a super sardonic vampire librarian reference to Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And that's not the last Castlevania reference in Bloodstained. You can unlock an 8-bit version of a sort of like an 8-bit corridor or dimension that is very, very similar to Castlevania 1 in both its looks and its and how the and its monsters. But Bloodstained, not a Konami or Castlevania game, but throwing up references and middle fingers to Konami left and right.
Every time the library was on that screen, that was like the most excited I got watching Bloodstained. Like, it's my favorite setting, favorite character.
He looks just like Alucard and is voiced by Alucard. And
there you go.
And he has a very much of a role as like, oh, it's you. So you want to check out a book? And and also because we were talking about how vampires have advanced technology and are techies, OD has access to camera and mirror and printing technology that is undiscovered by the humans. which is valuable because at one point to get onto a demon train under the castle you need a train pass.
That's right.
So you have to talk to OD. He'll tell you to go get camera stuff, and then he'll take a picture of you and print out a train pass for you. So he's a notary public and a print shop in addition to a library.
How convenient.
Really modern amenities, and Odie provides a public service. He's a best character in the game. And again, if you know nothing about Bloodstained but a little bit about Castlevania, go ahead and do a Google image search OD Bloodstained, and you'll see exactly what I mean. And maybe I've been glossing around it but not really mentioning it. Bloodstained's good. Like I was worried it would be a train wreck. Because it had a bit of a troubled development history. It was delayed by 2 years, ended up coming out in 2019. A couple of versions were canceled. I think the 3DS and Vita versions were. And the Switch version was a buggy mess. It was a little troubled, but it ended up just really good. The main character, Miriam, has a lot of cool powers. The castle is diverse and cool. There's a setting that's a rotational tower. So it's sort of like one room is like the base of the tower, but as you travel up and go left and right, it's a contiguous circle. So it's a confusing Mobius strip trying to figure it out on the map, but it's really cool. Really cool playing it in game.
The map is cool. There's so much customability too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. You find a hairdresser zombie and a tailor zombie that let you customize your outfit a little bit, and
you can change up your look.
Mm-hmm. It's just a really cool, feature-rich, kitchen sink approach to a Metrovania game that was Igarashi clearly just going all out and making exactly the kind of game he wanted. That was, a lot like classic Castlevania or his version of Castlevania, but with plenty of non-weird Castlevania stuff in it, like printing out train passes from a vampire librarian
and cooking.
And oh god, the cooking system is so huge that I actually. Ingredient hunting became a major part of the end game for me playing that thing.
Right?
It's like, oh man, I need to just get a ton of milk and eggs to make
Where's
butter.
the sesame?
To make butter and dough because I need pizzas and cakes to trade to this lady for the taking revenge on everyone's side quest. Oh, there's a lady who wants to will give you prizes if you avenge the deaths of a bunch of villagers, and all the villagers are named after Castlevania characters. Again, he's like avenging the death of his baby Castlevania. Speaking from Koji Igarashi's standpoint, like
wow, that's on the nose there.
Yeah, I mean, you can read it. Maybe I'm reading into it a little bit too much, but there's Bloodstained is both an excellent game in its own right. But if you're a Castlevania fan and a fan of just Konami taking one to the chin, then it becomes that much more fun. Again, it maybe isn't for everyone because it's a little messy and buggy, but it was one of my favorite games of last year. It's Bloodstained is excellent, and it's also an excellent time to end the podcast because we started with some classic RPG vampires like your Necklords and your Draculas, and then we end with psychic vampires and satirical vampires taking aim deliberately at Dracula,
but kind of in that classical style.
Oh yeah, it's a very gothic game. It's like Bloodstained is not a comedy necessarily, but it is taking aim at vampire fiction, especially a certain Konami vampire series, and I think mostly hits the mark. I'm a big Bloodstained fan, Bloodstained evangelist even. But anyway, the witching hour nears, and I must feast not on blood, but on maybe a burrito. So let's bring it into the podcast. Hilary and Audra, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a minute since I podcasted with you, Audra. I mean, you haven't been on the podcast in 6 months. I haven't talked to you in probably a year. That's a terrible shame. I apologize. It is all my fault. But
hopefully I'll be able to join a few more.
Yes, please. You know where to find our Google Doc in the sky. But and Hilary, always a pleasure chatting with you. We talked about some serial killers and some real trippy tunes the last time that we podcasted together.
We did. Still kind of creepy. Still in line with the season.
Ooh, they should put a vampire in a Persona game. They haven't done that.
Yeah.
I would know if there was a vampire in a Persona game because that's a very specific intersection of my interests. But alas, maybe Persona 6. Maybe Disgaea 6 will have a vampire. We know that one at least exists. But Thank you, Hilary and Audra, but also thank you, listeners, for joining us on our weird, rambling vampire discussion. Who knows if I'll let all of that Bela Lugosi and Twilight discussion into the final edit. Maybe I cut it all out and you're really confused right now. But regardless of your level of cohesion or confusion, thank you for listening. We have a lot of exciting plans coming up in Retro Encounter. I've planned out the rest of 2020, and I'm eager to get to it. Next week, we're doing the Kangao indie visual novel JRPG, Finding Paradise. That game is really cool. I need to finish it this weekend so I can podcast about it with Zach in a couple days. But you'll hear about that next week. And also in November, we're doing 2 episodes on Final Fantasy X-2, that girl power Final Fantasy game that looks crazy. I'm getting texts about it from Peter, like about the next crazy thing. And I'm like, dude, I've barely started it. You're way ahead of the game. I'm excited to play that thing because I think I mentioned this in other episodes. I played that game for like an hour 15 years ago, thought the menus were awesome, and remember nothing else. So that is going to be an adventure, me revisiting Final Fantasy X-2 very soon. And also, after that, we can talk about it a little bit. We're doing an episode on crowdfunding where Bloodstained and other and Eiyuden Chronicles and probably other games that you've heard of through Kickstarter or Fig or other crowdfunding services might make appearances. Crowdfunding has been one of the biggest things to happen to video games in the 2010s. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many of your favorite games started out as Kickstarter projects? Probably a couple.
And a good avenue for vampires.
Yeah, I mean, they're not putting vampires in AAA games anymore, so it's up to the indie scene, and the crowdfunding has energized the indie scene. It makes sense. People love vampires.
There's going to be a vampire in Eiyuden. Actually,
I wouldn't be surprised because we know that the Suikoden people love them some vampires. Mm-hmm. And the character designs in the early art we've seen for Eiyuden are incredibly diverse. So good. The character designs are awesome, and I haven't been following it that tightly because it's a 2022 game. I'll get excited later, but I'm not shocked that there's a vampire in it because of that pedigree.
I think they even had people voting on the design, on different designs for it.
I can't
remember.
They had the Castlevania honcho Koji Igarashi appear in one of the hype videos for Eiyuden Chronicles in his signature hat and signature whip. It's a circle of life.
Connections. There we go.
But also in December, there's 5 Thursdays in December, so I'm not going to say what the main game is, but we're doing a special episode in the first week of December to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Tales of Phantasia. That's one of my favorite Super Famicom or Super Nintendo RPGs. But I won't say exactly what the episode's about because it's a little weird. But we are going to talk Tales for a little bit in December. But if you want to talk anything with us, the best way to reach us is to email retro@rpgfan.com. I usually respond to that email address. I will take any comment or any criticism directed to us. The other best way to comment or criticize us is to rate us on iTunes or Google Play or how you are listening to us. But in addition to Retro Encounter, RPG Fan has 3 other podcasts: Random Encounter, Rhythm Encounter, and Phoenix Edge. Please rate, review, comment on those and listen. Rhythm Encounter just recently returned after a long hiatus. Phoenix Edge is mostly focused on current events. Random Encounter is focused on randomness. All 3 are worthy listens in addition to Retro Encounter. But RPG Fan is not just podcasts. We also have message boards and a Facebook page and an Instagram page and a Twitter account and a Discord server and a Twitch stream every day. There are so many ways to experience RPG Fan and so many ways that our staff is creating content. Please interact with us however you can. And I'm just looking at the other games we didn't cover for this episode. The feature covers Secret of Mana, Boktai Y2, Trails of Cold Steel, Erevorn, Saga Frontier, Vampire the Masquerade, Sacred, Bravely Default. And let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 vampires! Listeners. Audra, how can listeners find you?
Actually, it used to be audrab@rpgfan.com, but I don't know if I still have that email or not.
You should. It should have transferred over.
Okay. So I need to check that.
And Hilary.
So best way to reach me is hilary@rpgfan.com or epfire on Discord. And I'd like to add that the best way to criticize us is constructively.
Oh, yes.
I don't care. I will take any criticism that you levy towards me. I'm Michael Sollosi, and if you want to find me on these social media, I am at The Real Monsoon, and at Evoker for Dogs on Twitter, and on RPG Fan Discord, I am Monsoon Mike. Ah, the children of the night. Thank you. Good evening, and good luck.